This is a great follow-up.
Our next interview and our closing interview of the night. Cristina Martinez is coming to us from Seattle, Washington, an incredible contemporary visual artist. We've been following her for quite some time, whether she's been popping up in these incredible PR moments to collaborations in apparel with Nordstrom. She's been doing a lot of incredible work, and there's a lot of intent and emotion in the work that she brings to life. So please join me in welcoming Cristina to the stage. First time here, but you were born and raised in the Pacific Northwest in Tacoma, actually, which is just outside of Seattle. And your mom was young when she had you, right? She was 15, and you were growing up in this black and Latino household mixed with in this kind of largely white environment.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
We're going deep right away.
I know.
Yeah, my mom had me at 15, and I always tell people, like, you can be shaped by, the challenges that you face and the hard things you go through, or you can choose to, focus on some of the things that, like, really molded you. And for me, we definitely struggled having a 15-year-old mom who was still very much in school, and she raised me by herself. We had very hard times, but what I remember from my childhood was just seeing my mom take, like, her biggest challenge in life and let it push her. Like, she continued to push and push and push, and she worked very, very hard. And I feel like that part of my childhood is really what stuck with me the most and allowed me to do some of the things that I've been able to make happen. And as far as being in a very white neighborhood, and just a city in general.
The city, yeah. I mean,
it's honestly, it's something that I'm still getting used to. I think as you grow older and you become more aware of who you are and your identity, and you have experiences in life and feel the way the world treats you and sees you, I'm still learning how to be comfortable in that environment. And there's things that I love about the Pacific Northwest, but it's lonely sometimes. I know you.
No, yeah, I grew up here, 26 years. I know everybody acts like I don't because I don't have the accent, but I did. Y'all can ask around.
They got an accent.
But then, went to Boston and then went over to Portland. And when I got to Portland, I was chasing the sneaker dream, right? I was in that kind of tunnel vision. And when you're kind of in that tunnel vision, you don't think about everything else that comes with where you're going. You're just trying to get to the goal. And upon arriving is when I realized, I was like, yo, this is like, there's no one else here that really looks like me. And it's kind of weird.
It's different.
Right?
It's really different.
But we try to travel and get around so you can get those different. For you, though, when you were growing up, how did you get different exposure? Was it just purely from, like, family? Like, how were you, seeing other people that look like you? And then also, you have two different heritages, right?
Right. It was really from my family. I was raised mostly by the Mexican side of my family. And so, I have 45 cousins. And
Me too. Me too.
We
raise your hand. I see y'all.
Yeah, we were together all the time, and we still are together all the time. And that was my experience, and that's what I do with my kids. I make sure that my kids are surrounded by family all the time, and we kind of create our own community, and there's enough of us. So my family is what really kept me grounded and really made me aware of who I was and my identity and my culture.
I love it.
Yeah.
So at a young age, you were kind of gravitating towards art and expressing yourself through drawing or making different things. And I think I read that you would spend time watching Bob Ross, the painter, on TV.
I did.
How in the world did you get introduced to Bob Ross?
So my mom, having me at 15, she had no babysitter, which this would never fly now, but she would go to work from 6 to 2 p.m. and come pick me up from school, take me back home, and then she would go to work from 4 until midnight. Ooh. So from the time I was like 7 years old, I was by myself all the time, and I'm an only child. So
wow,
relatable.
TV was really all I had, and books. I love to read, but we didn't have all the channels. We had some channels, and Bob
They don't remember that. They don't remember when TV went off.
And Bob Ross was one. We had PBS, and it was my first time seeing someone doing something creative as their profession. And it stuck with me, and I remember seeing him on the TV and watching him paint and just thinking, like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like, this is what he does. He's on TV, he gets paid. But for me, being Black and Mexican and 7 at home by myself, it just seemed very far away. You know, he was an older white man, and it didn't feel like something I could ever really do, but it was my first experience with seeing someone with like a creative profession,
right?
And it never left me.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like at that age to like see something where it's kind of like maybe a little out of reach, because to the point that you mentioned, right? But it's also enlightening to say, like, to your point, you were like, oh, you get paid to do this.
Yeah, and it's in my mind now, because I remember how I felt in that moment, to where like now for me, the youth and that feeling that I had as a kid is always at the front of my mind, because I want kids now to feel like they can do that. You know, it felt so out of reach, and that part was really present in my mind. And, you know, so I kind of let that motivate me to just keep trying to put myself out there and allowing my kids and other kids everywhere to see a different perspective.
Totally.
It is possible.
Totally. Did you have anyone else in your family that was creative and that you would consider an artist that kind of understood what, you know, maybe you were coming from at a young age, or was it just more so like support of just you being creative?
It was more so support. I think even growing up, I didn't realize fully that I was creative. I knew that I was at home alone all the time. I knew that I liked to draw on things and doodle, but I never fully understood it. I just knew that it was a place of comfort for me. I mean, my mom likes to crochet, so I always tell her, like, you are creative, see? But other than that, it really was, I come from a family of very hardworking women that like clocked in, clocked out, clocked in again, you know, and just really focused on raising us. And they worked very hard, but most of my creative experience came from me just experimenting.
Now, you know, when you think about art, supplies are expensive.
Yeah.
Like, you got brushes, you got canvases, you got paint, you got all these different things. What were you using as a kid? Like, did you actually have like...
I remember one of my first like masterpieces that I made was on a lasagna noodle, and I had used my mom's nail polish and like tried to do what Bob Ross was doing. I had made like a full-blown landscape on this lasagna noodle, and it was like one of the greatest feelings for me. I got it out. It felt so good. But we didn't have canvases and paint and things like that laying around the house at all. We barely had food, you know? So it was kind of like I used whatever was there, and it allowed me to understand that I wanted to create. I knew that, you know, I knew that very early. And I remember I think it was in 3rd grade, I had got my first art set that had like pastels and watercolors and paper, and I was like, "Oh, it's over now. I can do anything now."
He's like, "I got it. Y'all better watch out."
Yeah, but I mean, I would draw on the walls like from a very young age, and I remember I would always tell my mom, I would say, "You can tell people I started and I was drawing on your walls. Like when I blow up someday." She always brings that up.
You already had the PR spin.
I saw it. Yeah.
Did you get in trouble for painting on the walls?
I definitely did. Definitely, especially like the few times we had to move back into my grandma's house, and it didn't fly over there.
No, like, yeah, you need to tell Cristina to stop painting on my walls. No, as you started to get older and thinking about like maybe what you were going to go into for school and things like that, did you know that you wanted to be an artist and you were going to go to school for art? Like, what was the path that you were on?
No, I mean, originally I went to school in Vegas. I went to UNLV, and I'm in Vegas. There's hotels here. I studied hospitality. I tried to do all the right things, but it was like in all my quiet moments, I was always drawn to create. It never went away. It was always there. And so in my 4th year of school in Vegas, I remember I called my mom and I was just like, this isn't it. I'm not supposed to be here. And ended up going to fashion school, and that wasn't
You went
it
to two
either.
schools.
Yeah.
I was barely trying to finish the first one,
I
but
know. That wasn't it. Fashion school wasn't it either. But it took those experiences for me to really find what I was passionate about. And, once I did, I never looked back.
What feelings came up for you when you were in those moments? Like sometimes we can spend our whole life just doing something because it pays the bills or,
Definitely.
it makes our friends and family happy. Where were you where you're like, yo, I'm not doing this?
I mean, I'm definitely guilty of that. Like, I think that a lot of times we get into these spaces where we just go with the flow of life and you don't really stop and like take those moments with yourself to like ask yourself, like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And to be really, really intentional with like your next move. I fortunately have a very loud inner voice that those quiet moments have been forced on me my whole life. And I've always been able to hear them. And I recognized at UNLV, like, I'm just here doing what I think I'm supposed to be doing. But then I go home and all I want to do is draw. And all I want to do is paint. And even in fashion school, it's like I'm illustrating my garments that I'm supposed to be sewing. But then it's like, by the time it was time to sew them, I didn't want to do that part. Like, my illustration had a whole life story and fears and dreams and goals. And like, this woman was like a person to me. And so that's where I realized that what I really wanted to do was tell my story through art and through painting and illustration. And
I love that. I love that a lot.
it took a lot to get there, a lot of money. Still paying that, but it was worth it.
A lot of times you got to think about your well-being, and sometimes, a lot of times your well-being is not just money, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of other contributing factors to that. So we've established that, the school thing, fashion didn't work out. So what did you do after that? Were you immediately a presenting artist? Like, what did you do?
No, so when I was in fashion school, I had already had my son, who was maybe 2 at the time, and I was still living my life, and I ended up taking some time and moving back home. And by that time, I had my son and my daughter, and I moved back home. And I just wanted a fresh start. It was like, I know that it's art that I'm supposed to do, but I'm going to just figure this out and start over. And I started working a regular job. I worked at a radiology clinic. And people would call.
You loved it.
Yeah, people would call and schedule MRIs for body parts that I didn't even know what they were talking about. I just put them on schedule. But it was in that time of like stepping back and starting over and living like a normal life that I realized I can never do this. This isn't what I'm supposed to do.
Wow.
And they didn't.
And you didn't.
Yeah.
So what would you do as you're in this this job that you hated? So it wasn't a radiology spot, but it was I was working at this data entry gig, and I was just
Same thing.
My team knows me and Excel sheets it's a challenge for me. It's a
Yeah.
challenge, but I'm working on it, y'all. I'm really working on it. But you're in this space and you're young, but you also have responsibilities, right? You have 2 kids. What is the journey that you start to go on after kind of establishing that this is not it? I can't do this.
I mean, while I was working there, one of the biggest things that came from that job was I had like this huge stack of Post-it notes that sat on my desk, and every day I would go in there and I hated it. I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. And I would illustrate something that represented my emotion for that day. So like by the time I think I worked there for almost 2 years, and by the time I left, I had like, if you open my drawer, there was like 700 Post-it notes in there. And with all these drawings on them. But I just slowly started to really put my mind in a space where I knew I needed to take a risk and to make that jump. And the thing that kept me there the longest was, I had my 2 kids, and I just kept thinking, like, do I make them sacrifice also? Do I put them in an unstable situation for the sake of me following my dreams? But what I really believe, and what I've learned and what life has shown me, is that when you align with your passion and you truly do what you're supposed to do, those things take care of themselves. They really do. And once I was able to give myself the time and the space to like really lock in with my art, those fears started to go away because I'm living in my purpose.
And so as that starts to shift, how do you start to get more confident in perhaps leaving that
He's a great interviewer, by the way. I just want to say he is a great
job?
interviewer.
Yeah, I mean, it just it took time, but it was just one of those things that I knew I just knew I didn't belong there. So it's like how long can you continue, you know?
Yeah.
And it was hard and we struggled. We definitely had hard times, but you know, I believed in myself enough to keep going and to make it happen. And also I believe, I always tell people this, I really believe in having that. If you have it all figured out and you have all your money saved up and you're able to take a risk, it's very different than like having that thirst and that hunger of like, it has to work. Like I have to make
You're
this
in
work.
survival mode.
Yeah. And that really was a big part of why things started to happen. I had no choice. Like it was going to work.
It
no
was
matter
going
what.
to work.
That's how I feel right
There was no
now.
other option.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That
you.
really is.
This literally, like, she is describing everything. Hold up, let me go to the, yep. Everything I'm feeling right now. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, baby, like, that's what this retrograde, all of this energy has been showing me. It's just like, it's now or never. Like, what else do you have to wait for? You know what I'm saying? All you literally need to do is to be doing the work to, like, alchemize, to literally make this happen. So what are we waiting for? What are we waiting 2 years, 3 years, 4 years for, when we could be doing what needs to be done now? Confirmation. But yeah, like, she's literally describing like what I'm going through right now. Is just like, baby, it's time to make that transition, and it's time to really lock in and let there not be any other options than this. But like, actually in my frequency though, you know, it's one thing to talk about it, it's one thing to know this, but to actually live out the frequency of what I'm talking about, that's another thing. And I think that's where I get caught up with, like, I should probably get a job or I shouldn't. So you heard the sirens, girl? I get stuck with that because it's like, I like be kind of scared, like maybe I shouldn't, like maybe I need to be responsible. And it's like, that's valid, right? Like I definitely should like be responsible, but then again, it's also like crunch time. Like, what if God is able to make a miracle? But it'd be like, what if God is telling me like this ain't the time? You know what I'm saying? It'd be all, so it's like, that's where my frequency, basically I just described to y'all how my frequency is. And it's in cognitive dissonance, right on time. So wow, you just gotta do it, bruh.
One of the, you know, you have a lot of different influences and a lot of different representations when you approach your paintings and your art. There's a particular thing that you're a bit more known for is the water me, the water me flower, and that came from that time.
Yep.
Yeah. Tell me where did that come from, and how did that start to make these appearances in your work?
That flower face was just, it started as a self-portrait. It was a Post-it note at that job and it just evolved. And it was one of those pieces that I created that I thought, you know, no one's going to understand this. Like, this is something that's like, because some of the faces have no petals, some of them look very dark. And so I'm just like, you know what, I'm going to keep this to myself for a while. And I did, and I sat on it. And then I remember when I finally shared it, just seeing people connect to it and be able to relate to those feelings and those emotions that I was feeling, it just was something that clicked for me, where I really, that's been like a driving force in like my work and being open to sharing my work and putting myself out there more. And I think now there's like I don't know, hundreds of people that have it tattooed. I see it all the time. I think it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a big moment for me.
Yeah. How did you get comfortable with sharing your work? Like, at what point did you think it was ready? Was there someone came in, like, just took a photo over your shoulder and shared it? Like, how did it get out there?
No, I think it just was like a natural, I started to get more and more comfortable. And like I said, I think when you realize that, like, the world we all want these same things. Like, we want to feel seen and understood, and we want to feel like we can all relate to each other. It makes the world feel a little bit smaller. And I think the more that I put myself out there and was able to receive that from other people, it just made it more comfortable. It made me feel better about it. And the beautiful thing about just social media or sharing your art in general, for me, is like, I still get to have like a vulnerable moment with just me and my art. I still get to have those moments where it's like me and my work, and then you get to put it out there, and like you get to see immediately how it makes people feel. And that really inspires me, that whole process.
Yeah. I mean, it's the ability to be able to communicate in real time,
Definitely.
right? And like, I'm sure a lot of people are probably, expressive to you of like how it makes them feel,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes you're probably like, maybe share too much, but
Yeah. Or I'll make something with this whole idea in mind, and then it'll mean something totally different to somebody else, which is amazing. You know, for me, it's like my job is to create it, and then your job is to interpret it and to let it make you feel how you feel. Yeah.
Absolutely. Talk to me about the pricing part,
Oh, God,
right?
my
Because
favorite.
I think whether it
She said my
is
favorite.
you have
She
a
a
freelance
Capricorn,
business and you're
y'all.
trying
Yeah.
to figure out what to charge, whether you have a product, a t-shirt, you want to price it, and you have art. How did you start to get comfortable and confident in what
Yeah.
you were gonna say your art was worth, and then how long did you wait, until
Yeah.
someone purchased it?
I mean, that part is still hard for me, I'm not gonna lie. But one thing I made a promise to myself when I first quit my job is that I was gonna put my value where I saw it, where I felt it needed to be, and I wasn't gonna back down, no matter how long it took. And it took a little while.
Yeah.
And I was gonna price my paintings where I thought that they should be, and no matter how long it took, I would, as time went on, I would raise my price, but I did not want to ever lower it. I didn't want to do that to myself. So I really thought about it, and you gotta believe in where you're going. And I kept that mentality when I priced my work. And I just never backed down. And like I said, it did take a little bit, especially in the beginning. It was like, okay, well, maybe we can have like a Christmas sale or something, But all it takes is one person. Once you sell one painting, then you can say, like, I sold this piece for this, and that's what it was worth. So, like, you just continue to go. It's really just a process of believing and not backing down.
And not backing down. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is time and place.
Yeah,
Time and place. Just because you're ready doesn't always mean the market is ready
definitely.
yet, right? But sometimes it's just withstanding, holding out, and that moment is going to arrive. Also, the part I also try to harp on is like, you also have to be good.
Yeah, yeah, that is true.
You can't go 10 years talking about some, man, it still
Yeah.
ain't sold. I don't know what's wrong with them.
You gotta be honest with yourself, yes.
And I think you also have to have honest people around you too.
Definitely,
You
that's
gotta have
important.
that people that you're going to listen to,
Yep.
right? Like sometimes you can't, yes, you have to have the confidence, but you also have to be humble enough to deal with feedback,
Exactly.
right? Because it's not always going to be, you're great.
Yeah, it's definitely not. And just know when to listen and when not to, because you shouldn't always listen to that either.
Yeah, right. You got to, sometimes it's like, I heard you, but I'm going to
Yeah.
continue to do
It's still
this.
my price.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, a lot of your journey with art had also been, expression and maybe coping and maybe, your way of dealing with mental health. How did you deal with your art then becoming your way of your income?
That's probably one of the things that I wish somebody would have mentioned it to me, or I would have just had the knowledge or been more aware of it when I decided to quit my job. That I think was one of my biggest struggles, is like when you turn to something for so long just to stay sane and have peace and feel good and happy, it's hard to then understand that that's now also your means for survival, and to put a value on that is really difficult. And I think it's just a mental space that I go into when I make my art, even if I'm making it knowing like we have bills to pay and there's things to do. I try not to even think about that, because I think the more authentic you are with what you're creating and what you're putting out there, that will get taken care of. You have to just keep going. And so it's something that, like, in the beginning I was just like, oh gosh, like I have to pay my bills and this also just saved me from being depressed. Like, how do I make this work? But I try not to think about it. I try to really separate the two and just make authentic work, and then use that to pay my bills.
To pay your bills.
Yeah.
You sparked something that used to drive me crazy. It doesn't drive me as crazy now, but it did drive me crazy when the advice would always be, don't chase the money.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, but that's what I want.
Exactly.
And, the advice would be, no, you need to focus on what you're creating, and then the money will come.
Definitely.
It always is true.
It is, but like, if I think about it, times where I'm like, okay, if I make this and I sell it for this much, then I can do this. It never works. It's like, I just need to just create, and then it will sell.
Now, how many, in a year, if you think about it, you may not think about it that way. Like, how many pieces are you creating? And are you going to your studio? Do you have a studio? Are you at your house? Like, how does that work?
I have a studio downtown Seattle, but I also, like I said, I have my 2 kids. I travel a lot. I kind of will create a studio no matter where I go. Even just walking around today, I'm like, I need a sketchbook. But I go to the studio. I couldn't even tell you. I don't know.
He's constantly creating. It's never, you can't turn it off, really.
It's just who I am now, so I don't even really think about it. I know that me and my partner, we did 2 shows in the last 2 years, and I think our first show we showed 44 pieces, and then our second show was like maybe 30 pieces.
Yeah.
So yeah,
you be working.
Paint.
I think, do you consider yourself a business? What do you still identify as a creative that as a business
I see
component?
myself as a business now. Yeah, I think it's something that I didn't go into this thinking that I was starting a business. I just kind of went into it sharing my artwork, and then I just learned how to run a business in the process. But now I would say I see myself as a business.
And I think in addition to that, you've started to do these brand partnerships, these art and partnerships with folks like Uggs and Nordstrom's, and even World Trade Center, right? How do you maintain your authentic voice when partnering with these corporations?
I think the first thing is knowing what to say yes to just from the beginning. If it feels like you have to go to outside of yourself to make it happen, or if it's something that it's just not what you do at all and you don't want to know how to do it, then know when to say no and don't be afraid to say no. Once you're in those situations, if it's something that you've said yes to, from my experience, I fight for what I believe in, and all of those people you named will tell you exactly that. But I put myself in these situations, and I always go into them and think, if this were my son or my daughter or any of the youth, is this company built to market them in a way that keeps the integrity of who they are and their work? Is this a situation where they're just being put at the forefront because they're a Black or brown face and it's the cool thing to do right now? I always ask myself those questions, and if it doesn't feel like it's in place, then I push for it. And it can get you a reputation. It can get very difficult, and sometimes it's hard to be that person that has to go into these spaces and make them aware of where they lack when it comes to working with people like us.
Totally.
But it's important, and it's always worth it.
You raise a good point, because at the end of the day, that brand might go on and do whatever they're going to do, and then what is your audience, the folks that love you for genuinely who you are and what you create? What do they then think if you do something that's ingenuine?
Exactly, and they can feel it. I feel like, for me, it's like what I put out there is such a reflection of me and my life and my thoughts and my emotions. If it's far off, if it's not real, they feel it and they don't connect to it. And I think that that's important when you go into these brands, for them to understand that that has to be there for things to sell. It's like you be authentic first, and then the product will sell.
And then it'll sell, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't operate the other way around. You can't force something onto it, right?
Exactly.
Like, that story has to be authentic from the moment that y'all come together, right?
100%.
And so, do you ever, like, I think you probably go into these conversations like you're already okay with walking away.
Always. Yeah, I think you have to be. And you really learn to stand in your power when you are in a place and you can say no to things. And sometimes you have to. And sometimes some of these opportunities, I've learned for myself, sometimes what you take from them is that maybe that's not what you want for yourself and your work, and that's okay too. Maybe you thought, I want to just sell all kinds of stuff and at this level, and then you do it and you're like, no, I actually like it to be really limited and really intimate, and that's okay. And I've learned that, like, do my best in every experience, but then, like, take what I take from it. And sometimes it's learning that it's not for me.
Yeah. Everything is not for everyone.
Exactly. You gotta just be who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that that's been the thing that's helped me the most, is just like trying to just put myself in a place where I can be as authentic as possible and not have to be anything that I'm not.
Yeah, I think you do that really, really well.
Thank you.
What does let the simple things make you happy mean to you?
That's actually something that my mom said to me the day that she came home and I had made masterpieces on lasagna noodles. And I've kept that with me just because I remember how I felt that day, and just knowing that I had the urgency to create something in my heart, and I was able to get it out with whatever I had. And I try to keep that with me now. I mean, some of my favorite pieces that I've made have been like with my daughter's art supplies. And I think if you just can find happiness and joy in just normal small things, you will live a much happier life.
I've been saying a lot of this lately, but I'm like, if it's not simple, if I can't simply communicate it, if we can't simply do it, then 9 times out of 10 we shouldn't be doing it.
Definitely,
right?
That's very true.
A lot of times I think that people get these narratives that it should be overly complicated, and I'm like, no, actually, I don't think it's supposed to work that way.
Exactly. When people ask me about my creative process, I'm like, I get a piece of paper and I just start going. Like, it doesn't have to be this whole thing, Yeah. I think simple is the way. Is the way to go.
Now, one thing that's really kind of been a dominant conversation in the art world, I would say over the past 12 months, is this conversation around NFTs. As an artist like yourself, who's very hands-on, very tangible, what do you think about this conversation, and do you participate in that world? Like, what do you think?
I personally have not participated in the NFT world just because I honestly don't. I just don't know how I feel about it. I don't have enough pulling me towards that direction.
Yeah.
I really love how I feel in my studio with, paintbrushes and sketchbooks, and like that hands-on feeling feels really, really good for me. And so, if it feels authentic, I'll go in that direction. But right now it hasn't. I support people that do. I think it's, I've seen some really cool NFTs, but I haven't tapped into it myself.
Yeah, totally. I had to ask because I asked a lot of different people who are musicians and photographers. I'm just curious. I don't understand the space.
Yeah, I don't either. I really don't.
But I'm definitely open to learning. I definitely want to. I definitely believe in the blockchain and that technology, and I'm curious to just see where all of that goes. The last question I want to ask you tonight, and it's one of those questions that I always ask, but it's around like when you think about folks that want to go down this path of being artists and also thinking about your art becoming your income. What advice would you have for folks in the audience tonight?
I think, if you're creative or if you feel an urgency inside of yourself to put something out there, to create something or to make it happen, I think the most important thing is just to do that. Like, people, I think, are afraid. It's hard to get vulnerable with like something you're passionate about. And I think you have to just do it. You have to do it when you're scared. You have to do it when you're not inspired. You have to do it when you're really inspired. I think it's important to just create by any means. Try not to look too much at the person next to you. Everybody's journey is different. Everybody's experience is different. And just do it. There's never, it's like having a kid. There's never a time that's like, this is a great time to have a baby. It's like, there just doesn't exist. So it's like, it might never feel like now I need to go for it. I think if you just do it, it just starts to happen.
You shared so many gems in that statement.
Thank you.
Like the whole thing around creating when you're not inspired, because I think a lot of times folks get caught up and they're like, Christina's just always creating. She must be like, love it all the time. It's like, no, you're human. You have to go through these blockages. And you might go through points where you're like, I don't feel like doing this today.
Definitely. You should know what your art looks like or what your work looks like when you're not inspired. You should know what it looks like when you don't have motivation. Just keep doing it. I mean, that's the most important thing.
It's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And then that other part that you talked about was not looking to see what other people were doing.
Yeah.
How important is that to you as an artist, right? Like, do you, in that, obviously you are fans of other art though, yeah?
Definitely, yeah.
So what does it mean when you're like, to not look at other artists?
I think I definitely look at other artists' art. I mean, I love art, I collect art, I support other artists. It's like their journeys, everybody's journey is different. So one person might use this kind of paint, another person, it's like you have to experiment, you have to figure those things out, you have to walk your journey to understand like what your path is. And I think sometimes, especially nowadays with social media, it's very easy to look at the person next to you and like, well, what they have going on looks like this and that's what I should be doing. But as much as you can, like I try to block that out for your mental health and for the integrity of your work. You know, just do what you're supposed to do.
Right, because you're uniquely here for your point of view. I don't want to see you doing someone else's when I'm like, I want to see Christina's unique perspective, what you offer, right?
It's the best way to find your purpose and to really figure out what you are supposed to be doing.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing. I'm probably going to watch that like 10 more times because it's so in alignment and inspiring.